Should I sit? All right, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started here. Welcome to our session this afternoon, showcasing sustainability success stories, lessons from Africa. My name is Reed Blakemore. I'm the Deputy Director of the Atlantic Council's Global Energy Center. We're an international affairs think tank based out of Washington, D.C. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you here today and welcome our panelists, both of whom are winners of the Zayed Sustainability Prize. Mansoor Hamayun, co-founder and CEO of Bboxx, and Muna Eltahir, the country director at Practical Action. Just to lay the groundwork for our discussion today, I want to ground truth us in kind of a singular idea that energy access is key to economic development across the continent, right? Whether you're talking about healthcare, agriculture, education, industry, water, and even climate change resilience. Energy is the building block of all of that. Now, the nexus of energy access and economic development and the need to build that on the continent represents a systemic change. You're building this system. And in some ways, that is a challenge and an opportunity. We're talking about a massive task ahead of us. Just 700 million people across the continent have no access to electricity, right? That's over 50% of just sub-Saharan Africa. 900 million lack access to clean cooking fuels, right? That's just in micro, two examples of the size of the challenge that we're dealing with here. And when you're doing systems building, you're also talking about the complexity of these systems. And you're asking a lot and need to respect the scale of the challenge that you're undertaking. That all said, systemic change is also an opportunity. It opens the door for more effective, reliable, localized sustainability model. And I think the type of localized bottom-up engagement that both of these two panelists represent success stories of really offer lessons that we should be learning as we look to sustainable development across the continent. Our question really for this panel then becomes, how do we achieve systemic change, energy, both in the form of energy access and sustainable development, while still pursuing and advancing the necessary and urgent goals of clean energy deployment and combating climate and adapting our energy system for climate change? How do we blend all of these various pieces together to create an all of the above strategy that includes energy access, economic development, and sustainability? So to bring it back now to our goal here, we should be using success stories like both of these panelists represent, the lessons that they offer and the best practices from around the continent to push the needle forward, and I think build upon the momentum that we're seeing from this COP. We were talking earlier before the panel. Yes, this is the African COP where we're giving a voice to the developing world in Africa and the broader developing world. But it's absolutely critical that this not be the only COP where we have these discussions. And hearing from folks like yourselves allow us to maintain that momentum and learn and move forward as we navigate this nexus of supporting a sustainable development for the continent and the broader region. So with that, I might first start with you, Muna. On this point of kind of local action, right? Practical Action has developed dozens of projects across Africa, right, which focus on clean energy, food, agriculture, urban waste also, but also water and disaster risk reduction. I mean, can you talk a little bit about the importance of engaging community members to create solutions that enable economic growth?
Action philosophy is to help people to be able to help themselves to come out of poverty. So community engagement is the heart of what we do, and sustainability is also the heart of what we do. We have three strategic objectives, basically, working with small farmers through increasing their production and productivity. We're working with energy, addressing energy poverty through renewable energy. And also we are working with disaster risk reduction, as you mentioned. We work in several African countries and we develop several projects aligned with our strategic direction. We work in Zimbabwe, Malawi, we work in Rwanda, Senegal, Kenya, and indeed Sudan. We demonstrated a very successful stories across the continent. We have an approach called integrated water resources management, where we develop water points for the communities through using renewable energy, solars, and using the water for addressing poverty in terms of provision of sufficient water for agriculture, for livestock, and for human use, along with lots of hygiene promotions. And this is very sustainable because the source of energies we are using for pulling the water for underground is a sustainable source of energy, which is provide sufficient water for multiple use. And also we have community forests through also same kind of projects through using the same water and increasing production and productivity through new techniques. You know, it's about using ingenious ideas for having high production productivity through a very sustainable source of income and empowerment. Also, we have a clean cooking for women, and this is a very gender transformative kind of intervention for women who are having difficulty in providing clear source of energy for cooking, and we provide clean stoves for the women. This is what we do basically. It's quite scalable, the project, and quite sustainable. We provide good documentation for the knowledge that we have from our successful demonstration project on ground, and we use it for influencing policies at the state level, influencing sister NGOs, influencing donor working on where we are working, and having change that is scaled in a sustainable manner.
You know, Mansoor, I want to turn to you next. I think Muna offered a number of examples of the ways you can, you know, engage at the community level and what practical action is doing specifically. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what Bboxx does, particularly given that, you know, you're talking about a business model and a platform that is incredibly interesting in terms of how you engage and support these communities, particularly through your pay-as-you-go model. So I'd wonder if you could touch on that for a little bit first.
No, absolutely. As you described, as Mona described as well, there's, sadly speaking, billions of people around the world that either have no access to electricity whatsoever or an extremely unreliable access. And that's, I think everyone will agree, an extremely unfair world, and electricity is essential to ensuring an acceptable quality of life. Now, the big opportunity here is that these households are able to make the right choice, the most sustainable choice and the most economic choice at the same time. That's the opportunity. And the way that we do that is that we offer households solar panels and batteries on payment plans. So we install the solar panels and batteries at the household level. We install all of the appliances. We put a smart meter at the household level. So when people pay using mobile money, the system turns on. When they don't pay, the system turns off. And in most cases, we're able to offer that daily cost of electricity or clean cooking or a water pump at a cheaper cost than what they were spending for diesel, for generator, batteries for radios, or kerosene for light, or whatever the prior solution was. And the big byproduct of all of this is that, sadly speaking, there are hundreds of millions of people that live in total darkness. They also are forgotten in many ways. There's very little data on them, tangible data. So what we also, the byproduct is an enormous amount of data per household. When are they paying, how are they paying, the seasonality of payment, the consumption patterns, etc., that allow us to actually get to a very intimate relationship with them. So today Bboxx is in 11 countries. We provide electricity to over 4 million people across the continent. In places like Rwanda, nearly 10% of all households in the country are powered by us. So going household by household by household, it might look like a small activity, and you look, and each system might look insignificant in the global context. But if you add that up, you actually can have a really, really big business built upon that. So that's on the business side. And very quickly on the structure side as well. I think one of the biggest thing I'm realizing about Africa, which is completely understated, it's truly the most innovative continent on earth. Things happen first here and then the rest of the world. The first cellular network that ever was created was in Congo. The first mobile cellular network was in Congo. The first time two phones could make a payment, so fintech, was Kenya. So and then the rest of the world adopts it, right? So I am convinced exactly the same thing is happening in energy here. And actually the result of that is that you have a continent that's not just digitally inclusive, mobile first, but you're also getting households that on a daily basis are becoming carbon negative. Right? And I think Mother Earth will thank these customers more than people transitioning from one heavy car to an electric car. I think the net impact to Mother Earth is greater here per dollar spent.
I think that's 100% true, and I think I do want to use both of your examples as an opportunity to kind of blow it back out to the macro level. When we look at this energy systemic change that needs to happen throughout Africa in terms of energy development, and to that end, I'd love to bring in His Excellency Adnan Amin into this conversation. Your Excellency, this is a continent that is resource rich is almost an understatement in some ways, right? From any number of legacy energy assets to wind, solar, etc. There are numerous opportunities for African nations to use their resources in a catalytic way to facilitate the type of economic development opportunities that we see throughout the continent. Could you speak to, what those opportunities are, which range from oil and gas to renewable energy resources, and how we actually effectively deploy those energy resources, into economic models?
Well, thank you very much, Reed, and let me apologize for being late. I was moderating a ministerial conversation of African ministers with the Chinese minister, especially about renewable energy. So this is really emerging as one of the opportunity areas for Africa today. We're at a very pivotal moment for the energy future for Africa, because we've had a decade or more of growth in African economies. The middle class has been growing. There's more disposable income. 3 or 4 of the fastest growing economies in the world have been African countries. And what you see is exponentially increasing energy demand. In other regions of the world, in Europe, in the United States, you see fairly stable energy demand. And with efficiency, it may even go down. In Africa, it's increasing exponentially. And Africa right now is at a very pivotal moment in choices it has to make about its energy future, which will determine its trajectory and its economic future, and whether we can have a model of industrialization and growth that can deal with the social issues, provide employment for the youth, which is one of the great priorities in the African context. So you have a situation, and let me say for both of them, I'm on the jury of the prize. I reviewed their applications. I know Practical Action very well from my past as Director General, as Founding Director General of IRENA, and we had great collaboration and great work being done. And then the innovation, Bboxx. This space, the way you describe it, is exactly the point at which energy access can be addressed in Africa. It is the interface of digitalization, energy access, mobile payments, that this kind of momentum can come. And we also have technological development, which allows for the kind of solutions that Bboxx is providing to actually be used not just for lighting or whatever, but for productive use. There are renewable energy solutions which can now power threshers in agricultural area, industrial machines, and so on. So small processing. So that transformation on access is happening. What we need on access is, where do we find the kind of concessional capital that we need to scale this? Scaling these positive examples represented by these two organizations would be the solution for access. And I recall very early on, we were looking at the numbers of people in energy poverty. And I was saying, how come I've been looking at this for 5 years and no number seems to budge? It's always 1 billion. Why is that? So we started looking at the data, and in the energy data, you couldn't find anything. So we went to the trade data, is where we found what's actually happening with energy access. We shaved 400 million people off the access list because of these kind of solutions, and that was reflected in the trade data, because trade was recording the importation of solar panels and the various aspects. So we see that there is a dynamism. The issue is, what do we do at the level of the power sector, at utility scale investment? So we have a situation where renewables are now, in many instances, cheapest on the grid. We have plentiful resource. Africa has one of the best solar potentials in the world, wind potential, huge hydro potential, geothermal. I grew up in Kenya, and in Kenya, we have a substantial part of our power mix, which is like 95% renewable now, is powered by geothermal. That needs investment. But at the same time, we have exploration that has led to new gas discoveries. So Africa is faced with a choice. Do we go in the direction of renewables, or do we go in the direction of oil and gas? And it's an existential issue, because we need energy. If we go in the direction of renewables, we need some solutions for capital allocation decisions, concessional financing, a lot of policy development to enable this to happen, and most importantly, the infrastructure that would support it. On the other hand, gas is seen as a low-hanging fruit. Now suddenly European demand for gas has shot up. So in the past, when the European countries were telling Africa, don't exploit your gas, they're now saying, actually, if you want to exploit your gas, we're ready to buy it. So it's become very complicated. The essential problem is an economic one. If you go in the direction of renewables, you're going in the direction of self-sustainability, you're going in the direction of some level of energy security and energy independence. Whereas if you go in the direction of gas, specific countries may have plentiful gas, but not the whole continent. But you will have a situation where we're beginning to see now major energy analysts projecting that we're reaching peak demand very soon, or we are already on a plateau. And at some point, price signals on demand will begin to show decreasing demand, which will affect capital allocation decisions and global prices. That's the point at which the real danger for Africa comes. Because if you're vested in billions of dollars of infrastructure on gas, at a time when the market begins to collapse, and you cannot valorize your infrastructure, you end up with stranded assets. And the problem for that will be that there's a lot of sovereign debt involved. African indebtedness at the levels that you could see in the 1980s is a real possibility in those instances. So I think it's really absolutely essential to have a very clear discussion around this. And frankly, the climate discussion doesn't make much of an impact in the African setting, because Africa contributes less than 4% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Their point is that if you want us to work on mitigation and you want us to go in the direction of the energy transition, live up to the promises that you have made about the concessionality of finance that enables us to do it. Don't lecture us about using gas or not using gas. So essentially, the international community has to put its money where its mouth is. So that's the broad framework that we're looking at right now. We're poised at this decision-making point, which is going to be crucial for the future. But the silver lining in all of this is the immense innovation you see. Mansoor mentioned M-Pesa. M-Pesa was the first mobile-based network in Kenya that was pioneered in Kenya, which was money exchanged by mobile phone. That's become now standard everywhere in the world. When you guys in the US use the Venmo, you're welcome. But let me say that this is just reflective of one part of it. The innovation that you see in African countries, you go to Rwanda, you go to Kenya, you go to Khartoum, you go, wherever you go, you'll see young people educated in these technologies, beginning to see the opportunities around this, innovating around this. And in the Zayed Prize, as Sharifa knows, the number of entries we get from African innovators, young people in this space, is truly remarkable, and that gives you a very positive signal about the future for Africa.
I do want to bring it, I do want to turn now back to the innovation angle. And Mansoor, I might turn to you first. We have this story around rapidly increasing energy demand, right? How do you see your organization catering to those higher tiers of energy demand and offering products and services that, frankly, in the long run will help reduce the cost of energy while still enabling the very access that demand is, establishing?
See, energy and poverty are very related, right? So, and economic development. So, one of the things that we have realized is that energy access is a pathway to all access, and I'll explain that. And by solving energy poverty, you actually can solve poverty as a whole. Let me give you an example of a customer that I met quite recently, John, in Kenya. And he's been a customer with us since 2018. He started first with a small solar home system, and we saw that he was making his payments on time, etc. So we upgraded him to a TV system as well. Now he's got a TV at home, and after a few months later on, he also got a cash loan from us as well. Right now, when I visited him, he was becoming eligible for an electric motorbike as well, right? So from us, so an e-bike. So the point is that when we found John, I think one could easily categorize him as a poor individual, or his family as a poor individual, right? But John, in hopefully 3-4 years' time, who has water at home, who has electricity at home, has e-mobility at home, has access to the services at home, he might not become rich, but I don't think he's poor anymore. So the real realization that we have is that the opposite of poverty is really having access to products and services. And the fact that we made that effort of learning who John is by installing the first system, getting the payments, getting the understanding, getting the credit scoring, you started building that up. So in terms of energy, the other big thing about sort of decentralized solutions in general is that they're extremely scalable. Whether we want to power this building or power one household, structurally is no big difference. It's more solar panels, more batteries, but rest is, it's commodified, right? So the question is more, how much am I willing to take a risk on that client to be able to actually finance his current need, right? So this is where concessional capital comes into play as well, because one thing that we find, especially among a really remote and I would say fragile community, is that the chicken and egg between having electricity and translating that into economic output is not immediate. Just because you have electricity today doesn't mean that you start making money tomorrow, right? It might take you 6 months, it might take you 12 months, it might take you 2 years to be able to fully get into the productive cycle of that. So for those sort of customers, subsidies are necessary, right? So in many countries now, there's an active subsidy programs where government has realized that it's actually better for government as a better investment to be able to help people get electricity so they can get on top of the economic empowerment ladder, reduce importation of fuel, improve health, and all of the benefits that sort of come with that as well. So I think concessional capital will play an extremely large role. The last thing I would just say from a energy sort of demand perspective is that the interesting thing about households in this continent, generally speaking, if they make 2 choices, they become carbon negative. 2 choices. One, go solar. Second, improve your clean cooking. These 2 choices, the household, actually, if you're a farmer, you actually become, as a household, net carbon negative, right? I'm so far away from that, it's incredible. The flight I took to Sharm el-Sheikh probably is enough to make sure anything I do further on this year will not be able to offset that, practically speaking. So these sort of choices, like with practical action, millions of people are doing. And I think that is something that is not properly rewarded. The carbon financing mechanism or carbon credits are there to reduce your carbon and rewards that, but it really doesn't reward not using it in the first place and actually going the negative territory. There should be a premium for negative.
I think one of the things that you're articulating here, throughout your really impressive response is, how do you connect sustainability initiatives to commercial success to ultimately, net negative commercial activity? And in that realm, I might, turn back to Muna. In that, Mansoor mentioned agriculture as one of these many places. And of course, Practical Action, I think, is doing a lot of work on the smallholder farms piece, where sustainability practices in agriculture are advancing commercial success while broadening economic development and ultimately empowering the very energy demand and access story that we're talking about here. Can you give an example of how Practical Action is supporting those smallholder farms and sustainability practices in agriculture?
Okay, provision of sustainable and scalable initiatives is extremely essential. And could only be done through the engagement of the private sector, the government, alongside with the civil society organization, such as Practical Action. I can give thousands of examples, which one of which is this is how we get the prize from the Zayed Prize. We have a project through which, like, I can take you to the clean stuff. Okay, we provide clean stuff for women in Darfur. Those women is no longer going for quite a walk every day to fetch the firewood. Now they have a clean energy in their clean cooking source of energy for in their houses. They have enough time to do economic activities. They cultivate their lands. They have livestock, and now they're having better quality of life in a very sustainable manner. This is how we do. We provide them alongside seeds and seedling and knowledge through school farmers, which having them now. I remember a very interesting story. Like, I was talking to one of the women, and she told me, now we have food in our plate, money in our pocket, and we send our kids to school. And this is a change. This is an impactful intervention, which make their life better through having access to energy in a very simple manner. Again, another example is the mini grids. This is also through private sector engagement, having house lighting, having hospitals, clinics, with provision of electricity for hospital and clinics. And this is also something that change people in a way that, like, health and the health facilities are improved greatly and reduce the morbidity in the targeted community. This is also something good example. The farmers in the communities that we target, they have water facilities for water harvesting facilities through using the energy, solar, and this is also increase their productivity and lifting them out of poverty, as an example.
That's it. Your Excellency, I want to turn to you once more, and I think after this I'll open it up to audience questions, so start thinking, and I think we'll have a mic running around if anybody wants to volunteer. You mentioned in your opening remarks here several times the issue of finance, right? And obviously this is the implementation COP. We're spending a lot of time talking about sustainability finance, climate finance. How, in your mind, given that we have such profound success stories to draw from, right? How do we better unlock the institutional capital from both African and global financial institutions to not just empower specific localized success stories like these on stage, but also facilitate the broader systemic change, I think, that we see needing to happen on the continent as it explores sustainable development.
Yep. Well, when you listen to both of our prize winners, you really begin to understand how transformational this is for people's lives, if you imagine rural African households without any form of modern energy service, the hardships they had to endure, the fact that for lighting, kids go to school, when they come home they have to do their homework. If you have paraffin or kerosene lighting that's indoors, the quality of indoor air pollution was causing huge health impacts among young people in Africa. The health burden, the cost of the health burden itself was a huge financial cost. That is being alleviated through this process. Right. The clean cooking is relieving pressure on the environment because people are not cutting down firewood, burning charcoal as much as they did before. So that regeneration is happening. There are huge environmental and health services that we are benefiting from because of these kind of successes that are not valued, that are not part of the modern calculus of how we make economic decisions. And I think we have to get much better at that. What we require in terms of the financing solutions for scaling up off-grid access is not a huge load of capital. We're not talking about billions and billions of dollars. According to different markets, just a capital pool, medium-sized capital pool, can create the framework for either subsidies, for either equipment or for services that can create exponential change. You have to also understand that many of the people who are looking for these access solutions are really at the margins of the economy. Their disposable income is almost non-existent. You cannot go with a market-driven model using the interest rates of commercial finance that you get in Africa, which are almost double the commercial finance rate that you're getting in developed countries, and then expect those businesses to actually function. I think that what we have to do much better is innovation around this kind of financing approach, valuing the services that we get from off-grid energy access in financial terms much better, and factoring that into a kind of a facility that we can design for local circumstances, because there's no one-size-fits-all in this. I mean, we can't go to different markets and expect the same model to work. I mean, the financial sector in Kenya, for example, may be more developed than the financial sector in Burkina Faso, but the problems are the same. So we need differentiated solutions. We need to access the kind of capital, concessional capital that we need. We need to be able to valorize the services that are coming from this much better in order to create a different kind of economic calculus on how we do this. Now, the financing discussion at COPs is about the big money, mitigation, adaptation, trillions, billions of dollars. Here, we can affect people's lives materially for the better. Substantial numbers of people, in the tens of millions, in a fairly short period of time, if we can get the financing question right. So that's a challenge for us for the future. How do we do this? How do we design this for different markets? And I think that's something around which we have to put our minds and try to engineer these kind of solutions in the future.
It's really what you're actually calling for in your excellent answer is the same level of creativity from the financial community that you see from these type of programs right here, right? You have the innovation happening on the ground. You need to think through the creative financial models to empower that innovation further, because I think what we're talking about in general here is a story of empowerment. I want to briefly open it up to the audience should you have any questions. Otherwise, with an eye to the clock, I might give each of our panelists the opportunity to make one final statement. Muna, I'll start with you. Any final words to leave us as we kind of move forward and hopefully take some of these thoughts and lessons and experiences that we discussed on this panel forward into the balance of the week?
I would like to conclude by saying addressing the poverty of the energy is very, very essential in order to better the quality of the life of the most vulnerable people and less fortunate. And through doing that, we can resolve lots of challenges that faced by the communities we are serving. This has required lots of huge commitment from the civil society organization, from the donors, from the government, from the private sector. We have to take that seriously. And this is one of the most essential way of addressing the challenges of the climate change, which make our mother continent accommodative for the generations to come.
Mansoor, any final thoughts?
I really think that Africa has the potential to be not just a thought leader in energy transition, but it actually could become the first continent that fully does transition and become net negative. Not just net zero, net negative. And I think that technologies exist, organizations exist, willingness exists. I think what does need better is coordination and maybe also right size the. I really think energy transition or energy access is a low-hanging fruit in the big global energy transition story, but I think the description of it as a low-hanging fruit to solve needs a bit of work, and people like yourself and the Zayed Sustainability Prize giving that recognition is an important part of driving that change. So thank you.
Your Excellency, any final thoughts?
Thank you. I think that, when you see our two prize winners, and I go back to the process of the prize. We started off as an energy prize. We became a sustainability prize. We felt that we needed to move in the direction of sustainability because energy touched everything, but water, food security, health were all critical aspects of sustainability, and we wanted a more rounded approach. But we have a very rigorous process of selection. We go out, we call for proposals, and we have a 3-4 level tier of rigorous assessment. And the criteria are who makes impact on the lives of people. And I think that allows us to provide the kind of, it's not a huge amount of money, but the seed money that comes with the prize enables the scaling of some of these small enterprises. So I think the prize tries to achieve an impact like that. And through our process, we also identify so many change makers in different sectors, which allows us to create an ecosystem that can potentially be transformative. And we try to bring them together also, exchange their knowledge, exchange their ideas, and spread them further, because they're not those kind of regular old-style 1930s capital to the top hat, and these guys want to share their experiences. They want to affect change. Their business model is to make a difference in people's lives. And I think that's the most inspiring thing about this, and that's why the prize will continue to support these kind of great individuals.
Yeah. So just to wrap us up quickly, I think what we've covered today is ultimately the notion that what's happening on the continent is a catalytic opportunity in many of these communities. And you have, innovation, localization, and community building is impactful for facilitating the sustainable development throughout the continent. And that impact requires empowerment, right? That impact requires empowerment through systemic change. It requires empowerment through the creativity from global stakeholders to do things like placing a value on the economic and sustainability benefits of programs like yours. And learning those lessons is going to be critical to success, not just on the continent, but as I mentioned at the beginning, taking those experiences into other contexts throughout the developing world. And so with that said, I'd like to thank His Excellency for joining us today. I'd like to thank our prize winners for joining us today. I'd also like to mention that this January we'll have two new new round entirely of Zayed Sustainability Prize winners announced. So it's wonderful to see how, these are just two of numerous success stories coming out of this program. So with that, I'd like to give our panelists a lovely round of applause. Okay, only 3 minutes left.